Science fiction has always been my absolute favorite genre, but growing up, I didn't really have access to the internet until I was around 16. So in the beginning, the only way for me to know if something was good or bad was to find out for myself firsthand. So it should come as no surprise that I've experienced a lot of bad sci-fi, but no matter how bad it was, I still enjoyed a lot of what I found. So much so that I eventually started to look for bad sci-fi intentionally, especially in video games. And what better place to look for bad sci-fi games than on Steam, which has thousands of games in the sci-fi category alone. From the mediocre to the absolute worst, I'll be digging through all of the bad games in Steam's sci-fi collection looking for potential hidden gems. Now obviously a lot of them will absolutely deserve the rating they've got. And on top of that, Steam has quite a bit of shovelware, which are low quality games that often use pre-made assets and are usually sold for pretty cheap. So even though they won't all be winners, I'll at least be able to help you all figure out which games to definitely avoid. Hi, I'm Krozo, and in this video, we're going to be looking at Orangecast, which was made by a Russian indie developer group called Team Rez and was released on January 21st, 2021. Looking at the store page, Orangecast is described as a sci-fi space game where we play as one of humanity's elite space troopers on an action-packed adventure throughout the galaxy. We'll get to explore planets, protect colonies, and be the first to meet the unknown. It also claimed to be inspired by the Expanse series, which was an interesting claim to make, but it still piqued my interest a bit because I am a big fan of that series. But they do provide a number of screenshots and videos showing off the game, and they honestly don't look half bad. Though I will point out real quick that 3 of the videos are a little outdated, but only because they had released a patch later on that updated a bunch of the UI elements. Orangecast also boasts some awards during its development. They won the Winter 2020 Indie Cup Award for the Best Unreal Engine Game, and they were also nominated for the Winter 2020 Indie Cup Awards for Streamer's Choice and Best Audio. And on top of that, it was also a finalist for the 2020 Games Without Borders Award as well. But all of that doesn't necessarily guarantee that the game is going to be successful. And unfortunately, Orangecast didn't do so well after being released and currently holds a mixed score of 48% with only 133 reviews. The primary culprit was definitely the writing. In fact, I'm gonna apologize in advance for my attempt to explain the story as it plays out, because while the Russian to English translations were not terrible, they're also not great. And when you combine that with the quality of the story writing itself, it was a little difficult to understand. I did read through it again during video editing, so I am a little bit more confident in my understanding of the story than I was during the actual playthrough, but I also noticed a bit of contradictions and certain details told throughout the story, so I'm still a little iffy about it. But bad writing was not the only issue. There were also a lot of not so great design choices implemented throughout the game that really made the gameplay pretty unpleasant. On top of all of that, there were also some very obvious optimization issues with the game. For me, it was mostly some occasional frame rate drops in the game, but also on 4 different occasions, I ran into this issue where OBS would just crash with some kind of error that I've never seen before. So the score was definitely not unreasonable, but one question still remains. Can the game still be fun to play? So let's take a look at the gameplay and find out. Oh, but real quick, I'd like to throw out a visual sensitivity warning. Throughout the game, there were some flashing elements that could potentially trigger some photosensitivities, but on top of that, there may be some other visual sensitivity elements in the game that may also cause some issues. Only reason I think that is because I can only ever play this game for about an hour before I start having a headache. And I don't typically have that kind of issue with video games. The only reason something like that would typically happen to me is because of certain things like motion blur or unnecessary camera movement. All of which were things that I could not turn off in this game. So just giving you guys a heads up just in case. The game is divided into 3 acts, and Act 1 starts off with a short cutscene animation supposedly meant to amp us up for what's to come. The animations aren't exactly the best, but it certainly catches my interest. The first level is a tutorial level in what looks like a virtual simulation environment that would later lead into the actual story. The tutorial covers most of the basics, but there's not really any actual fighting until the very end where we face a boss. Once the boss has been defeated, a short cutscene plays out showing me finishing off the boss, followed by making my escape in the weirdest way possible. Yep, I shoot out a magical alien fetus. Those are 3 words I've never thought I'd string together in a sentence. And there's no explanation behind it, like for the sake of lore or anything like that, it just happens. And what follows after is what felt like the slowest intro credit scene I have ever endured. Literally just a 4-minute scene of the magical alien fetus flying around. And once we get to the end, it turns back into the original guy and I come face to face with this alien entity who tries to explain the situation to me. However, as mentioned earlier, the writing in this game is not great, especially for the dialogue. So I'll try to summarize this conversation as well as all future ones as best as I can. Basically, I died. And when I died, my mind was supposed to be uploaded to something called the UNC Digital Storage System. And no, the UNC abbreviation is never explained, not even in the codex. But instead of being uploaded into the system, I somehow end up in a parallel universe called astral space. And in order for this alien, this astral by the name of Asphalt, to be able to locate me, he had to initiate a training program in the digital storage system, which is in our universe, also known as cosmic space. And now that he's found me, he's going to take me back to the digital system in my universe. So somehow, humans unknowingly created a computer system capable of locating a digitized human mind in another universe. I mean, sure, I'm all for it. One of the things that I really like about bad sci-fi is when they come up with technological and scientific concepts that make little to no sense. Now, on top of translations, one of the issues that makes it a tad difficult to understand what's going on is how disconnected the conversations and the story as a whole can be. At one point, Asphalt explains that he's going to help me get back to the storage unit, to which I ask, what kind of storage is this? But Asphalt doesn't actually answer my question. Asphalt instead mentions a new key topic, something called SOF Uber units. As you can see in the dialog box, it comes up as if it's not the first time he's mentioned it, but this is in fact the first time it comes up. And although he does not do so clearly or directly here, he is basically explaining that I have become an Uber unit, and the process of becoming one is also why I have no memory. However, he still never really answers the question. In fact, the way it was written, it feels like he just changed topics completely. Fortunately, I eventually pieced together all of the information I get to be able to somewhat understand things on my own. The storage system is basically used to store the digitized minds for Uber units when they are not in use or in between deployments. He then gives me the chance to ask some questions before he sends me off. This is where I get my first multiple choice dialogue, which is where 2 more issues with the writing really show themselves. The first, which I honestly think is the biggest issue here, is how info is given to me, or in some cases, how it's not given to me. Throughout Asphalt's explanation, he drops some key terms: UNC storage system, Scion, Uber unit, and astral and cosmic space, that kind of stuff. But he doesn't really give a lot of details in the initial explanation, which is fine in a game like this. It's supposedly big, with a supposedly big story. There's going to be a lot of information, and you don't want to info dump the player all at once in the initial dialogue. But that's where multiple dialogue options come into play, where you can choose questions to ask and get more information, to get more detail about certain topics. But this game does not do that. I do get multiple dialogue options, but a lot of them don't really help me get more information on the things I need or want to better understand. When it comes to dialogue options, which technically we've been seeing throughout the entire conversation, it's just that most of the time it's a single box that we click to continue the conversation forward, but it will have text inside of it to make it sound like we are contributing to the conversation. But in this particular conversation here, only 3 will help me get more info because the 4th one just ends the conversation. And none of them really provide me more information for the aforementioned key topics. So none of these choices are particularly helpful in understanding what has already been talked about, but the first one at least provides new information. But how I come to know to ask this question, I have no idea, because at no point in this entire conversation was there ever made mention of a person called Orange. And the only information I do get about Orange is that she is a woman from my family who had the power to summon astrals and had asked Asphalt to find me. Beyond that, nothing else is so far known about her. Once I finished asking questions, Asphalt sends us to the digital storage system, which is now later referred to as the hub, according to the game. The place is pretty big and is a combination of alien flora and a city infrastructure called Titus. Now I enjoy games where I can explore and be rewarded for doing so, and this game does sort of have that, but it doesn't really make that known to the player. There is no indication from the game that I could do this or even find stuff for doing this. While exploring, I found a bunch of oddities with this place that don't really make sense given what it's supposed to be. The hub is not just for me, it's for all the Uber unit soldiers, which is shown from the robot avatars walking around as well as the chat log happening in the top left corner. However, this place is also occupied by what I assume are corrupted entities that will attack me and other avatars on site. Which is a bit odd, given this is a storage system for the minds of Uber units, you would think would be a lot better maintained and protected. Probably the weirdest thing here was a totem that was specifically waiting for me to give me a new weapon. It wasn't immediately on my person or on the ground, so I assumed I'd get it once I entered the real world at some point. But this at the very least shows that there is some reward for exploration, even if the game doesn't actually tell you that. But once I finish exploring, I head my way back to Asphalt, who's hanging out in the Titus city infrastructure. He reiterates my status as an Uber unit, then informs me that I am about to return to the physical world on a planet called Scion. But first, I have to go through a briefing before the system lets me out. But instead of just leaving it at that and then playing the briefing, he goes into this weird amount of detail as to why and how I play the briefing. This game will occasionally put a huge amount of detail on things that don't need that much detail. Just start it via your interface. Following the guide, it should be in the following direction. Start media briefing something. Enjoy watching and good luck. Aside from being nonsensical, I don't understand why that much detail was needed to tell me how to play the briefing when the game is just going to play it automatically for us. And it's not like we can watch these cutscenes again at any other point in time aside from replaying the whole game. The briefing is pretty much just a history lesson. Basically, humanity experienced a technological boom and discovered a new fuel source called Effortane. At least, that's what I think it's called because the entire briefing had like 3 different spellings. This fuel source allowed them to explore the galaxy and colonize new systems. But then, as humans often do, they split into 2 factions and went to war with each other over the fuel. The war led to a lot of fuel deposits being destroyed, effectively isolating the various system colonies from each other, because they no longer had the means to travel between them. And the colony that I'm in is ruled by corporations. However, this detail appears to be contradicted by the fact that one of the original faction groups, the Red Fleet, is in charge of balancing the corporate powers. In fact, it's the Red Fleet who created the Uber units to help them do this, so who's really in charge is kind of unclear. But with the history lesson out of the way, we get a pretty cool cutscene of me being pulled out of stasis.
Привет. Прости, что выделила тебя так поздно. К сожалению, у нас не так много времени, поэтому я должна рассказать тебе все в краткой форме. Ты сверхюнит, элитная единица сил Красного флота. И, к сожалению, ты уже умер. Но это не так плохо. Разумеется, все твои навыки и часть личности сохранены в форме программы на базе нейросети. Зато у тебя новое и классное тело. Понимаешь, все это время ты учился, готовился к этому моменту, и вот пришло время вернуться к жизни в бодрой и свежей форме. Неизвестные атаковали колонию. Они хотят получить доступ к тому, с чем не смогут совладать. Во благо твоего вида мы обязаны вмешаться в этот процесс и выяснить, что происходит. Я покидаю тебя, мне нужно активировать других. Следуй моей программе.
And then we get another cutscene that briefly describes the situation on Scion. The colony is being attacked by two of the big corps, Pandemic and Monolith. But that's literally all the information we get. And again, it feels like we're being presented with information in a way that makes you feel like you should already know what these terms are and everything. Like, it just automatically is like, oh, they're being attacked by Monolith and Pandemic. Cool. Who is that? The cutscene could spare some time to give us a little bit more detail on who these are. Not a lot of detail, but just something to go on to maybe understand like who it is we're up against. Just saying Pandemic and Monolith doesn't really do much. Even when you look in the codex, it really doesn't give you that much information about them other than that they're two apparent human organizations. We also don't even get a clear goal set. It's literally just head towards the objective while defeating enemies. There's no real conversation or dialogue explaining what exactly I'm supposed to be doing here. It's made a little bit clear later that we should just escape the planet. But up until that point, it's just go to this objective marker, then go to this objective marker, and occasionally things happen. And that's pretty much the entire gameplay in a nutshell. In fact, after this cutscene, nothing of note really happens for a bit. So I'd like to take a moment to talk about some general stuff about the game. First off, the level design. It's a bit intense. There is a lot of stuff going on in each level, and while I do think it looks really good, it does come at a cost of performance issues. In my case, it's usually in the form of small but noticeable frame rate drops every once in a while, but on top of that, it would also cause OBS to struggle with recording sometimes. Even after lowering the graphics settings that were available to me, there was still not much of an improvement. Next up, combat mechanics, since that's pretty much all there is to the gameplay. Combat itself isn't too bad. I'm never overwhelmed with enemy numbers, and the damage system is not severely unbalanced, so I'm never considered underpowered and the enemies are never overpowered. And even if I ever do find myself at low health, I have this shield skill that also heals me, and it only has a 20-second cooldown, so it's something I can use pretty often. The weapons are the only real problem with combat. For right now, I currently only have 4 weapons: a primary firearm, a secondary firearm, grenades, and a melee weapon. Later on, I will get a 5th weapon type, a special type. But even though I have 3 different types of firearms, I still only get a singular pool of ammo shared across all 3 guns. I've never been a big fan of this mechanic. Not many games use it, and the ones that do that, I've never understood the point. Like, why give us multiple weapons to use in the game to accomplish our objectives, but then only give us a singular ammo pool to keep the weapons stocked up with ammunition? Another thing I don't like about the guns is that despite the variety of guns available, they, for the most part, felt the same. Primary weapons were all rifles, and the only thing really different about them was the amount of ammo in the magazine. There was no real difference in damage dealt to the enemies too. Like, it honestly felt like each gun did relatively the same amount of damage, so it took the same amount of time to defeat the enemy. And even though some of them appeared to have a scope, there was no actual scoped weapons. It was all zoomed in over the shoulder kind of aiming. I think there was only one primary weapon that was actually pretty different, and not to mention pretty decent, but I don't get it until much later on in the game, so I'll talk about it later, because it's its own special situation. For secondary weapons, you basically had the choice between 2 handguns, where again, the only difference between them was the amount of ammo they could hold. One did look like it was more of a laser handgun than a ballistic handgun, but that ultimately did not mean anything. For special weapons, when I get them, I have a choice between a shotgun or a flamethrower. There is one other special weapon in the game, but in order for me to get it, I have to find it. It's not given to me as a reward. Shotgun is nothing special to write home about, and the flamethrower doesn't even set enemies on fire. And the damage output for both of them aren't much better compared to the other weapons. The last thing to note about guns is the reload animation. Every time any of the guns are reloaded, there's an explosive electrical effect and the camera shakes a bit. It doesn't negatively impact gameplay in any way, it doesn't make reloading more difficult, and it's not staggering the player, but for me at least, the camera shake gives me a headache the same way motion blur does. The melee is not particularly fun either. It's incredibly clunky and a little hard to aim. especially when you're trying to do multiple strikes in a row, because your camera moves around a bit, making it hard to keep it focused on where it should be. It's more of a last resort for when you inevitably run out of ammo. Finally, the grenades. These are useful for crowd control, just not in the way you think. Instead of being explodey grenades, they're singularity grenades. They'll suck in every living thing within range, including yourself, and do damage over time. Aiming for these is pretty weird. They're not thrown at an arc like normal grenades, but instead make a beeline to wherever I'm roughly aiming at. They also have a bit of delay appearing after the throw animation, and instead of coming out of the left hand, they come out of the right side of my body. And that's pretty much it for combat at the moment. The only other gameplay mechanic to really mention is the ability to interact with certain objects. In some cases throughout the game, it's just to interact with objective items, but in some cases we sometimes interact with computers in order to open doors or release force fields or something like that. Those animations are actually kind of funny when he's interacting with computers because it's basically just him smashing the computer every single time. And that's pretty much all there is to the gameplay, just running around fighting enemies and getting from point A to point B. And it takes me about 10 minutes to do just that in this level until I reach the bottom of an elevator shaft and trigger the next cutscene. The conversation in this scene is short. These three figures are aliens from a faction called Hex, and they just found this ancient alien structure. They're not fond of humans or this Kaiser guy, despite the fact that he's the one who hired them, so they plan to destroy the structure in order to prevent anyone from getting it because of the immense power it could give them, supposedly. Once their leader disappears, the cutscene ends and I take down the two that remain before jumping through the portal myself. Another cutscene starts, showing the Hex leader destroying the structure, followed by a sequence of scenes that so far is still somewhat keeping me interested in this game. After that, it's just more running and gunning until we get to a small ship to escape the planet. This triggers one last cutscene for this level that contained a very entertaining segment. Unfortunately for the scene, I had to mute the audio because it was using some music that I was concerned might trigger a copyright claim or some other issues with YouTube. This is unfortunately a problem with many indie games, especially those who purchase their audio assets from online stores. I really want to know what the thought process was behind this scene. Those were some goofy intimidation tactics right there. I'm more embarrassed for the enemy for falling for it. But with that, Act 1 ends with a very brief cutscene that I'm convinced wasn't supposed to be there. That was it. That was the whole cutscene. I didn't cut it up in editing, and there was no dialogue. I'm not sure what that was supposed to be. Act 2 starts off with another PowerPoint describing the events between leaving Scion and arriving at Zeost. I was put into cryo for the journey and the ship was being remotely piloted by the Guardian. As the ship was leaving, 3 unknown ships, including one called Trilobit, appeared and attacked me and my ship was severely damaged, but still managed to get away. Beyond that, nothing else of note was mentioned and I get loaded back into digital storage. It puts me in the exact same spot every time I load into the system. I'm not sure why, because it's not like any major changes occur in this level. Anything that does happen here from this point forward will happen at the city area, a fact that I painstakingly verified every single time. The one new thing that happens this time around is this gift box. A robot pops out, does a little dance, and then disappears. And what's left is a message on the ground. I'm not sure why the robot couldn't do the talking itself, but sure. The message invites me to participate in a special test that will be available the next time I'm in storage. I'm actually going to read this conversation word for word here because it's actually one of the shortest ones in this entire game, but it still demonstrates a lot of the issues with the dialogue. Hello customer, I have an offer for you. There is one temporary event that is to test a UNC task developed for mass use digital storages. And so what? You are offered to take part in the test. This is absolutely free and you'll get a prize to compensate the test participation. Are you interested? Maybe. Unfortunately, we still don't have the space to make the study. To be frank, sometime we didn't have your permission as well. Stop, did I give it to you? UNC services and telemarketers consider your answer maybe as an uncertain consent. Anyway, construction of the test facility for you has been started. Why are talking about marketing managers? Come down, let's arrange a chat during your next visit. We will again discuss all and our service will provide more details. This box again? Sorry, only this delivery option is available in your digital storage. There's just always so much unnecessary, not to mention irrelevant information in these conversations. But in this particular conversation, my character seems more hyper-focused on the odd details than the NPC is. The game is set in a megacorp controlled system, so of course there's going to be telemarketers, and who cares how they send me the message as long as they send it? Here's how the conversation literally could have gone. Hey, we have a challenge for you to test your skills, and if you succeed, you'll get a prize. Are you interested? And then we could have the option of saying yes or no. And if I say yes, it could respond with, okay, the challenge will be ready the next time you enter the system. If we say no, it could be like, okay, goodbye, and then disappear. I don't know why we would say no, but if it was an option, then at the very least, the developers wouldn't be completely lying about this being a choice-driven story. Because for every dialogue so far, I've been given a single choice. It's pretty much a continue button, but it's made to look like I'm responding to whoever is talking to me. The very few times that I have been given actual choices in dialogue in this entire game, it's been for things like asking questions to get more quote-unquote information, to decide whether or not I should start the next mission, or just random answers that barely feel any different from each other. At no point do any of the choices I make actually impact the story. Case in point, when I go talk to Asphalt after this, one of the first things he asks is how Scion went, stating that he is fully aware that a lot of people died. Yet for some reason, I get to choose how to summarize the events of Scion. I don't even understand why I would have different choices for this if he's already fully aware of the situation. Asphalt then explains my destination Scios is home to the Coalition forces, and that I will need to gain their trust if I expect them to help me with my mission. A mission that has not actually been explained to me yet, so I don't know how I'm supposed to do that. He then explains that this is the last time I will see him, and he just wanted to stick around long enough to make sure I'd be okay. But even so, he says I won't be alone in this system because as I defeat certain enemies, they will be converted into data and uploaded into the system for me to interact with. Once the conversation is over, my ship crash lands on Ziost and the Coalition forces recover me and take me back to their base to patch me up. As soon as I'm back on my feet, I get a chance to explore the base before talking to their commander. And the base is, well, interesting. The design in general is pretty impressive, but there's a number of oddities. The buildings are mostly what you would expect in a sci-fi game, but for some reason there are also Japanese-themed assets sprinkled around, such as some fencing, lampposts, a few buildings, and even one of those big wooden gates. There's also what looks like to be some concept art scattered around the base as graffiti. Looking at them after already having played the game, I don't believe some of these were even in the game. There's also these guys. I think there's like 2 or 3 of them on this base and I haven't seen them anywhere else. There's no info on them in the game and they just seem to serve no purpose. They're just there. Honestly, the only thing here that can't be considered out of place are the billboard advertisements, because again, megacorp themes. So it would make sense that they advertise to their own employees and soldiers. I had my suspicions at first after seeing the digital storage system in Scion, but it's becoming more and more apparent that this game is likely an asset flip. I've said this before in my other videos, but I won't stop saying it now. By itself, using store-bought assets isn't necessarily a bad thing, as long as there's a quality game behind it. But some developers will use these assets to hide the fact that they put minimal effort into their game. And this game does appear to match that MO. The gameplay is so far generic and unoriginal, the mechanics are frustrating at best, and as I've pointed out many times, the writing is not very good. But the levels do look great. They look like a lot of work was put into them. They have all of this detail. And I will honestly say that despite the oddities, I do think the Coalition base looks pretty good. But as I had mentioned at the beginning of Act 1, this high level of detail is actually hurting the game more so than it is disguising the other problems. All of this detail causes graphical performance issues, especially during missions. It's pretty ironic. But in the end, I can only say that I think this is asset flipping, simply because I don't have the time to scour the entire Unreal Engine asset store trying to find all of the assets used in this game, but I still think it's very probable. After I've finished exploring, I head over to the commander here, who's also called the Sectorial, to figure out what I need to do to gain his trust. In order to believe my story about Scion, he needs to view the footage from my suit, and while he's doing that, I need to help him take care of some deserters. Objective-wise, it sounds pretty straightforward, but the explanation makes it more complicated than it needs to be. Basically, I'm given no information on what it is exactly that these deserters did other than leave their post. But rather than just apprehend them, I'm asked to take care of them. And then I have to plant evidence to make it look like gangsters were responsible for their demise. All because this guy is worried that their values and balance will be shattered. A bit hypocritical, wouldn't you agree? I think as an example, a more sensible, straightforward mission, it could have been like, gangsters were attacking our patrols and stealing our supplies, and he wants me to put a stop to it by any means necessary. It's less convoluted, it still just gives us a random task to do to prove ourselves to him, and that could have been it. But now it's time for me to head out. Now, technically I was supposed to go to the arsenal and get some weapons before I left, but as you can see, I somehow completely walked past it. I wish I had a good explanation as to why, but I really don't. I just wasn't paying attention. But also in my defense, the only objective marker I had was pointing to the mission departure point. And on top of that, the developers did not include logic to prevent me from leaving until I had my weapons. When I leave for the mission, I get a quick cutscene showing the trilobit. Some guy activates these pods that launched from the ship, which then causes these crystals to form on any living thing it touches. The scene ends there, and then I get to witness my less than graceful drop-off. Now, as I mentioned earlier, my first attempt was without weapons, and spoiler, I didn't get very far, and I had to reload to an earlier save just to get my weapons. But before I show my attempt with weapons, I want to talk about one thing that for some reason was only available during my first attempt without weapons, and that's vehicles. I don't know what happened, but during the second attempt, the vehicle just wouldn't spawn anymore. Not that it would matter though, because the vehicle in this mission, the only one I ever get full control over by the way, was absolute garbage. Now the in-game explanation that I get later is that they don't really have any good vehicles in decent shape. They're all pretty much garbage, so they just use what they have on hand. Alright, that's fair. However, the developers came up with the worst way possible to portray this. You see, what could have happened in the game was that I could have been given a vehicle that seemed okay and was easy to control, but then halfway through the mission, oh no, it broke down. Now I gotta walk the rest of the way there. Oh, that sucks. That would have been totally fine. Instead, what I got was a vehicle that would constantly, not to mention violently, spark in such a way that the vehicle would be pushed in various directions. And it was happening constantly. It was really annoying and made the vehicle completely unusable, especially since there was also enemies in this area that would be attacking me. So when I reloaded the game to get my weapons before going into the mission again and then started the mission only to find the vehicle wasn't spawning for some reason, it's pretty easy to imagine how much I didn't care. The mission is more of the same, run towards the objective while fighting off enemies. The game does introduce a new enemy though, some giant spiders that are incredibly annoying to hit, especially once they're up close. And to make things worse, they vary in size by a lot, and some of them can get very, very small. There are also some side missions in the area as well. I don't know if that's the case for every mission, and I don't know how many there are supposed to be in this one, but I did find at least one here, but it was by total accident. The side mission was basically to shut off some speakers that someone was using to talk through. I think there were two, but I only ever found the one because there were no objective markers for this mission. I didn't really know there would be side missions at all. The game doesn't really tell me that's a thing. Plus, not only does the game continue to not emphasize exploration, I also don't even have a map, so not being able to track where I've already been makes exploration a lot less fun. and this place had spiders spawning all over the place. It takes up quite a bit of ammo to get rid of them, so I had more than enough reason to just get out of here as soon as possible instead of exploring. This was also one of the levels that would have performance issues, like a lot of lagging and stuff like that, but also it would cause OBS to stop working. OBS wouldn't like full on crash out and just close, but it would stop recording and I would get this error message. And if I tried to restart the recording, the message would come back up. So the only way for me to fix OBS was to restart it completely. And I've been playing games like Final Fantasy XIV, Stellar Blade, a few other things. I've been streaming and recording at the same time. I have never had performance issues with OBS. I've never had this error message ever appear. This only happened with this game. But I eventually make my way to the camp, I deal with the deserters, and I plant the evidence. As soon as I'm done, I get a pop-up explaining the scene with some extra detail. It basically points out that these deserters were actually victims to whatever was going on in the Trilobit cutscene. I then get a prompt asking me if I want to leave or stick around to finish up any side quests. It was kind of a nice touch. I didn't expect the devs to do something like that. I didn't stay, of course. I just went back to base. With no easy way of tracking the objectives and no specified reward, I didn't really think it was worth it. As I'm leaving, we see some soldiers from Monolith are keeping tabs on me and order this guy to hunt me down. And in case you didn't notice, this is the guy from that brief cutscene at the end of Act 1.
Особенно не важно. Только не наделай шума. Если коалиция вмешается, нам может... Ну ты понял.
It then shifts back to me returning to base where the sectorial and 4 random NPCs are waiting for my return. This scene was weird for 2 reasons. The first reason, the obvious reason, is that out of all the animations you could have picked to have them celebrate my mission success, why this one? The second reason, why is there a group of people celebrating my mission success in the first place? I thought this was supposed to be a secret mission because the sectorial didn't want his men to know he executed deserters. The sectorial congratulates me for a job well done and proceeds to hand me my next mission. We briefly talk about the crystal stuff, but nothing important comes from that conversation. I also got a new weapon from the previous mission, and I of course tried it out for the next one. It's called Lost, and it's not too bad. My next mission is to go over to a small town where some gang members are holed up in and go deal with them.
Различные ракетометы. В их лагере есть зенитные комплексы. Пока последние функционируют, задействовать что-то кроме пехоты для нас крайне рискованно. Справляйтесь как можете.
There's nothing really special about this mission story-wise. It's a pretty linear level, just like the Scion mission where the objective is just to clear out the enemies. But in this mission, we actually get some NPCs to help. Kind of. They're not really that smart. Once I get to the end, there is a ship that picks me up and flies off. A guy named Melcher, or Melker, I don't really know how to pronounce his name, he is the assistant of the sectorial, and he contacts me and gives me a new mission. I need to find an alien species local to Zyos called the Zealots and ask them for help for the upcoming war. The next level starts off pretty uneventful. The only enemy at the moment are these floaty things, but they don't take any damage, so the only thing I can do is avoid them. Also, at some point, Kaiser, the leader of the Monolith, will start talking to me. This is the first time he interacts with me, but he makes it sound as if we worked together before. Along the way, there are several drones that I can interact with. When I do, it's to extract information from them. None of it is really important though, it's just some background lore on the Zealot race. It's a nice touch, but not really worth anything. What is worth looking at though is this place here just off the main path. Remember when I mentioned that there was a third special weapon? This is where I get it. All I have to do is solve a puzzle. Interacting with the drone to the left will give me a story that I'm sure is meant to be a clue of some kind, but with the bad writing and translations, it's really difficult to understand the clue they're trying to give. Fortunately, the puzzle is easy enough to brute force. I just have to light the fires in the correct order. I get hurt if I get one wrong, but with my healing ability, it's not really a big deal. Once the puzzle is solved, a door behind me opens and I can retrieve the weapon. A massive scythe that when swung will release massive bolts of energy that can deal quite a bit of damage. Sounds cool on paper, but this weapon is next to useless unless the enemy is really up close. It will fire 1 to 3 bolts at a time, and they spread out, making the weapon only useful for less than medium range attacks. And unlike other special weapons, I can't run while it's out. Aside from its damage, the only other good thing about it is that it does not consume ammunition. Continuing on to the objective, I eventually make it to this abandoned village, with a lot of crystallized bodies. Kaiser starts talking to me again and refers to this place as a show that I am starring in. He's starting to sound kinda evil. At the very least, it definitely sounds like he's the one responsible for all this. But like many other things in this story, I can only infer that. Many important details and events in this game are never fully confirmed, if at all really. As Kaiser finishes his short dialogue, one of the bodies charges towards me with an explosive strapped to it, and every time one of them detonates, a weird laugh track starts playing. Once they're dealt with, I make my way up the stairs to trigger the next cutscene. My character interacts with a body at the top of the stairs, which upon doing so appears to teleport me somewhere else. Based on appearances, I'm assuming astral space, but here I finally get to meet Kaiser face to face. Sort of. According to Kaiser, he and I have apparently known each other for a long time, and it sounds like we were on the same side. He calls this place we're in an illusion of the world we know. I'm assuming he meant reflection and it was just a bad translation, because I don't think illusions would require me to physically be teleported away. Especially since at the end of this scene, he has to open up a portal for me to escape. He also seems to be aware of my memory loss, but despite knowing that, he doesn't make any effort to help me with it. In fact, this whole dialogue doesn't help us understand anything. He's doing all the talking but somehow manages to explain nothing. It's a short scene, so I'll read it out for you. Well, hi, I haven't seen you for ages. Are you impressed? Don't look back. Everything you see is an illusion of the world we know. Unfortunately, I'm not strong enough to control this illusion. I'd like you to see this all with your eyes. Probably, your memory will partially recover. If not, anyway, I've tried. It's not exactly what you see. Are you listening to me? Hey, that's important. Oh, now I know what you worry about. They were doomed to death because they interrupted the cycle. These are the rules of the game, and we should follow them. I don't like it too, so getting back to what I had to give you. Damn, somebody is attacking my illusion. Goodbye, friend. See you soon. I'm not quite sure what I was supposed to learn from that, like, at all. But once I escape and I'm back in the village, I have to start running to the exit because the area is being bombarded as well. And as if that wasn't bad enough, there are more crystallized enemies to deal with along the way. Once I make it to the end, a cutscene shows me making my escape by train until an explosion knocks me off the track. The scene is then followed up with another PowerPoint, filling in some of the details of the attack. It was orchestrated by the Pandemic Corp, and they were primarily targeting Zealot villages, but they are attacking the Coalition as well. Fortunately, that means that the village I went to was not the only Zealot village, and that there are still probably others we can go to for help. So some good news at least. The PowerPoint also says that Kaiser's Corp, Monolith, will also be joining the Pandemic group. So yeah, I'm still not very clear on whether Kaiser is an ally or not. But by the time the PowerPoint is over, I have somehow made my way to a nearby Coalition base. And I don't even know why the hell that guy is dancing. Like, dude, come on, we just got bombarded. The size of the space is a bit much. They could have made this a small hub for me so that everything I needed was within reasonable distance, but instead I have to run all the way to one end to talk to Melcher, and then all the way back to the beginning to talk to the guy to actually trigger the next mission. The next mission will take me to a different planet called Eden, where the ex-self-educating robots of the Red Fleet, also known as Dagons, reside. The Dagons became so smart they gained self-consciousness. I'm assuming they meant self-awareness, but Melcher also says that the Dagons built barricades to isolate themselves, so part of me was kinda hoping that it wasn't a mistake. But given how the writing has gone so far, I doubt the devs planned that. This conversation then provides me a chance to quote-unquote make a choice. I can either choose to join the other soldiers for the raid on Eden, or I can stay here and wait for the sectorial to come back with news on the strange crystals currently being examined by some scientists. But there's not actually a choice, I can only go on the raid. And to actually join the raid, I have to go all the way back to the other side of the base to talk to a commander who will give me a quote-unquote funny mission. I'm not quite sure what that was supposed to mean, because there was certainly nothing funny about the mission. It was pretty standard for what this game has given me so far. Once I ship off for Eden, I get to spend some time in Titus. The only important thing that happens this time around is that there is someone new waiting for me at the hub, a guy named Siler. This conversation was pretty hard to follow. The only thing I could really make sense of in this conversation was that my supposed physical body actually originally belonged to him, and I somehow took it from him when he died. It also sounds like we just knew each other and I just somehow existed within his body. How that worked and to what end, I have no idea. Originally, I thought this was just a badly written metaphor on how one mind split into two, but the more he talked, the more it sounded like we were always two separate people. But he eventually comes to terms with the fact that I'm the one in control now, and he gives me access to a special ability that allows me to project a clone of myself to distract enemies. A very powerful and useful ability that I will end up using a lot. Once the conversation is over, I return to the real world and Melker is giving a rallying speech about how we need to win against the pandemic, all while a battle scene is playing out. My mission is to make my way towards a nearby Dagon camp while clearing out some enemies. It's a pretty short mission, only about 6 enemies to deal with really, but 2 of them are these Juggernaut guys that can take a lot of damage. Once they're all taken care of though, I trigger this goofy vehicle animation and cross over to the Dagon camp. Due to their isolation, the Dagon's speech capability is pretty minimal, because as machines it's all they needed to communicate with each other. Though I still think it's pretty funny that despite their isolation, they still managed to pick up the art of beatboxing. Now one would think that the limited speech would make conversations even more painful in this game, but it's actually been an absolute blessing. They're probably the only conversations in this game that don't give me a headache. The only oddity with these conversations was that the leader of the camp addressed me as Siler out of nowhere. I literally just learned about Siler myself, and he wasn't brought up in any conversations with the Dagons, so I don't understand how he knew that name. The Dagons want me to take a train to a place called Peak Island to destroy what sounds like an EMP pulse weapon, so that they can take back their island. The Dagon also mentions that some of the coalition should be on the island as well, so I should be on the lookout for them. After getting on the train, we then transition over to this guy, and this time he's actually planning to fight me. And apparently Kaiser has asked him to test me. Why? I still have no idea. I honestly don't know what is up with Kaiser. The fight is for the most part straightforward. He has an ability where he turns into a ball of energy and flies to different areas around the map. When he does this, another ball of energy splits off from him as a decoy. I have to keep track of both of them because there is no real indication of which one is actually him. And sometimes they will go in 2 completely different directions, very far apart, so I have to make a choice on which one to follow and hope I'm right. When he's vulnerable, he's usually pretty far away, so unfortunately the scythe is no good against him. So it will be a pretty long and drawn out fight. But when I defeat him, he just dies. That's it. There's no final monologue or someone coming in the last minute to save him or anything like that. He just dies. But with him out of the way, I continue on to Peak Island to deal with the signal. It's pretty much the same deal, point A, point B, fend off enemies. And occasionally the signal will fire off a pulse that will affect my visuals but not my health, so I'm pretty much safe from it. The only interesting moment in this level is running into a hologram of this hermit. There's nothing important from the conversation itself, but he does use a drone to help me get past a broken path. At the end of the level, a cruiser comes out of nowhere and destroys the signal before I can get to it. The destruction causes an energy blast to hit the ship, causing it to go down, landing right on top of me. My fate in the real world is unknown for now, but my mind is back in the digital storage system, where 2 surprises are waiting for me. The first is the UNC challenge. It's finally available. I have to navigate through a maze to claim my prize while periodically fending off enemy ambushes. The maze itself is not too hard to navigate, but the enemies get a little frustrating the longer it takes to get through it, because the ammo will run out very quickly. And the only ammo drop available is the one at the beginning of the maze. After 20 minutes or so, I do make it to the end, but the prize waiting for me is just a massive disappointment. It's described as a really old magazine, and given the description, I thought it would improve my ability to reload or maybe even get rid of the explosive electrical effect that happens every time I reload. But as far as I could tell, it does absolutely nothing. So what exactly was the point of diverting the player's attention with this challenge if we don't actually get anything useful out of it? In fact, the developers pretty much admit it was trash in an almost fourth wall breaking kind of way, because the next time I'm in Titus, another package falls down, and this is the message I get. Greeting, dear client. We have gathered data of your progress around our labyrinth, and we are eager to hear your review. It's neither fish nor flesh. I have no idea what the f that's supposed to mean. Wait, we haven't yet started asking questions. What about our award? What do you think about our artifact? And then we get some choices here that are all pretty nonsensical. The only one that makes sense is the one that says it's bullshit. So that's the one I pick. Accepted. Unfortunately, we failed to put something more precious in it. You should understand that this is the digital storage. All rewards are also digital. Whatever, let's keep going. How do you like the labyrinth? And then some more dumb choices that really don't make anything. I mean, they're all pretty much insulting it, so it doesn't really matter. So I guess it all fits. Well, as representative of UNC, well, we suffer from unfair developer. And this is what I'm attributing to the fourth wall breaking part. It probably isn't fourth wall breaking, but like honestly, it sounds like it to me. I don't know why they're making it sound like they're insulting themselves, because that's pretty much what they're doing. But I choose, what the hell are you talking about? Okay, I'll confess. We simply cut corners by generating this labyrinth. We just aim to see you get in troubles and put your lives at risk. Looking for the second-rate magazine. And then, I'm about to insult them. Ah, you bitch. Sorry, I have another call. And that is literally it. So they're pretty much admitting that this whole thing was garbage. I already thought the whole thing didn't really belong in the first place, but between this conversation and the reward, why put this in the game in the first place? It was clearly a waste of time and what little resources they had to work with on this game. So why? I honestly have no clue. I try to keep a neutral, objective attitude when addressing stuff like this, especially the things that I really don't like or that really annoy me. But this is something that was just too much. I don't understand how you could come to think that putting something in here like that was a great idea. Aside from that, the only thing left to do here is to talk to my new guest, Fincher, but he doesn't really provide anything beyond an explanation of his involvement with us. Basically, he's an Uber unit like me, but with non-human experimental tech. Kaiser basically put Fincher through all this when he took over Pandemic, and while it was painful, Fincher said it was worth it because Kaiser made sure his family was taken care of. Fincher doesn't really provide anything else for me, not even a new ability, so once this conversation ends, I return to the real world. When I wake up, I find myself somehow not crushed by the ship that fell on top of me and begin moving my way forward. Now remember at the beginning of this video when I mentioned that there was a primary gun that I get access to late in the game? Well, this is the level where it happens. It's a really cool gun and a really useful one, but then I realized where this gun came from. This is the gun that the Juggernaut enemies use. I always thought it was a bummer I could never pick up their weapons before, but I never really questioned it. But now that I do have it, I can't help but wonder why I couldn't get it before. And unfortunately, I don't get to keep it. Once I reach the end of this level, I lose it and I never get to use it again. The arsenal will never have it in its stock, which sucks because it even makes relatively short work of the Juggernauts themselves. And as for the end of this level, there's a portal for me to jump through which starts another PowerPoint. Basically the portal sent me to some strange unknown location that kind of reminds us of the digital storage system. Then this slide comes up next, but it's really weird because it doesn't seem to have anything to do with the rest of the information in this entire PowerPoint. It looks like it's supposed to be part of a completely different PowerPoint where a conversation should be happening, but I'm not really sure. It's very odd that this appeared here. But it snaps back to the main plot. That was really the only slide that was out of place there. It was really weird. And my character then comments on how his powers are acting up. He also realizes that he somehow knows about the particles that are surrounding him and that they are called orange, although he doesn't understand how he knows that. The PowerPoint ends with my character passing out and thus marks the end of Act 2. Act 3 starts off with a quick look at what Kaiser is up to. You remember those aliens that destroyed the temple back at Scion all the way in Act 1? Well, the leader that ordered its destruction is currently imprisoned aboard Kaiser's ship. We learned that the Hex leader's theory that the temple was a weapon was incorrect. It turns out the temple was meant for something far more important, and its destruction is actually going to cause a lot of issues later on in Act 3. Aside from this, the conversation doesn't really explain anything else any further. We're this far into the story and still nothing has really been explained, especially this cycle which has been mentioned a number of times since Act 2. Based on the context in which it's mentioned, I'm assuming it's the cycle of life and death, but what I want to understand is why the story is so focused on the concept, because Kaiser has constantly been referring to it as the cycle with a capital C, making it appear to be something more than just a simple concept. After this scene, I wake up to find myself in an empty building being watched by zealots. They explain to me that everyone is currently being attacked by the undead, who are the rulers of this world, and they have been kidnapping zealots and humans alike and turning them into more undead. The remaining humans and zealots are holed up at a zealot camp called the Shelter, and I need to make my way there now. Further up ahead, I start seeing what looks like ghosts, but they don't really do or say anything, so I ignore them and move forward. I eventually run into some regular enemies, but there's only a handful of them, so it's not really anything too difficult to handle. At the end of the tunnel, I find a highway system and a hover car that I get to hop into. Now, if you thought this would be just a quick cutscene of me traveling across the highway to my destination, you would be wrong. It's actually a sequence where I get to quote-unquote control this hover car. However, control just means that I can move the vehicle left and right and that it has a blaster that I can shoot. But it's all for nothing. There's nothing on the road that I have to dodge or shoot at. The sequence is just an unskippable car ride that I have to sit through for a minute and a half. After the car ride, we get a brief scene where this guy who appears to be a high-ranking undead is preparing to send out his forces. It then switches back to me and I have another boss fight to deal with. It doesn't have a unique name or anything, it's just called Ghost. And it was only a 4-minute boss fight, but it was the longest and most boring 4 minutes ever. Because instead of giving him some interesting mechanics, or at the very least making him feel dangerous to the main character, they just made it incredibly difficult to even touch him. His tactics are pretty much the same as Fincher's, and he's constantly teleporting around the map. But unlike with Fincher, there's no way to tell at all where he's going to end up until he starts attacking. With Fincher at the very least, there's a little trail you can follow and take a guess at which 2 points he might be at. And with Ghost, most of the time he's really far away, and with all these rocky towers around blocking line of sight, I'm almost always repositioning myself to take shots at him. But I only have mere seconds to do all this before he teleports again. And to make things worse, he's a total bullet sponge. I can maybe knock 2 to 3% of his health off at a time. 5% if I'm lucky and he teleported somewhere close by. Fortunately, taking his attacks are a non-issue because each hit doesn't do too much damage either, and with my healing, I'm almost always at full health against this guy. Which is good because he completely ignores the clone, so I can't ever distract him or anything. But once he's gone, I proceed forward and I come across more ghosts. However, unlike the first set of ghosts, these actually speak. And based on the dialogue, these appear to be from people who only recently died. And it sounds like they are fighting against the so-called undead that I've yet to see. But one ghost does mention that there is a treatment to help prevent them from turning into undead themselves, and it contains something called Orange, which is something that was mentioned once in Act 2. So this is the second time that Orange has been brought up, but it's still not very clear what Orange is supposed to be. Aside from that though, nothing can really be learned from these ghosts. It really just seems to be meant to paint a picture of what these people were going through facing the undead. But once I get past them, I finally get to come face to face with the undead. And yes, I do see the resemblance too. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt and assume it wasn't intentional. The character and pod models were probably 2 separate assets, but putting them together, it was literally the first thing that came to mind when I saw them. The undead are no more difficult than any of the other common enemies, but unfortunately, they do not drop their weapons after being defeated. Aside from a few more firefights, nothing else interesting happens until the end of the level. We eventually meet up with a hologram of Kaiser, only when I first played this, I didn't know it was Kaiser until my character actually called him Kaiser at the end of the conversation. The developers out of nowhere changed his name without explanation and without even making sure that the player would understand that it's Kaiser they're talking to. I don't even know how to pronounce this new name, so I'm just going to keep calling him Kaiser. But this time, Kaiser actually gives us some form of an explanation. Granted, some parts of the explanation were still pretty confusing, but I'll do my best to try to summarize it for you. He starts off by explaining our origins. We are part of a race in astral space that originally had no physical body, and they had to adapt to survive. He doesn't explain how they adapted, but once they did, this race started enslaving other races and transforming them into one common race. But somehow that common race managed to split off back into different races, and wars happened and the tech used to create the common race were lost. In order to keep their race alive, they've been performing hybrid experiments with other races. And although it's not said explicitly, it appears humans may be their best match. In fact, it sounds like I am one of these hybrids myself, but something the humans did during the procedure messed it up and caused my memory loss. That something is likely the act of me being turned into an Uber unit. And because of my memory loss, I was unable to complete my mission, and Kaiser thought I betrayed them and was planning to kill me. He had no idea that I had been turned into an Uber unit until he invaded Scion. And on top of that, when the temple was destroyed by the hexes, hybrids from one of our race's experiments woke up and thought we betrayed them, and now they just want to destroy everyone. That's my rough understanding of his explanation. It may not be entirely right, but that was the best that I could figure out. And after this conversation, Kaiser warps me to the base camp where all the zealots and humans are stationed waiting to fight the undead. I help them fend off an attack and then head out to check on some zealot allies who made a camp nearby. Unfortunately, they were attacked by the leader of the undead and didn't make it. I return to camp and talk to the keeper to discuss my plan to gain access to something called an archive, but it appears I can't do that until the undead are dealt with, so instead I need to meet up with Kaiser again. The gate that I need to go through to get to Kaiser is being guarded by this huge spider mech. Damaging it appears to be impossible, but fortunately I'm allowed to actually skip it and just go through the gate. There are two areas behind the gate that I have to navigate through just to get to Kaiser. The first area started off with the undead, which were pretty easy to take care of. But then the spiders appeared, so I chose to book it to the exit instead, because the spiders have always been kind of annoying. The second area was only undead, but when I started getting bombarded with a weapon that I could barely defend against, I decided to just try to run through this level too. At the end of the level, a long cutscene plays out with me and Kaiser teaming up against the undead leader.
Твои усилия бесполезны, пока ты сражаешься с порождением Оранж. Ты ведь догадывался, да? Ты же не настолько тупой, надеюсь. Оранжевые частицы тебя зажарят.
But just as we're about to win, Kaiser stops the fight and somehow convinces him that we are not enemies. And for the first time since Act 1, the Orange Mistress has been brought up again. And apparently everything that has happened so far has been part of her plans. And she is the one the undead leader should be fighting against. This appears to appease our enemy, and he just walks away. By the way, we get an achievement for watching this cutscene. There is an achievement for defeating this boss, but we don't actually have to fight him. It's literally just sit and watch the cutscene and we get that achievement. Kaiser and I then discuss our plans for the future. Kaiser is taking Monolith and Pandemic to go deal with Mistress Orange, and I need to go back to base to get to the archive before I can go deal with her myself. And even the PowerPoint that comes after this conversation does seem to emphasize the point that we are finally going to deal with the Orange Mistress. She's not just going to be tucked away in the shadows while we deal with a whole bunch of other stuff and just be completely forgotten. It seems like we're actually finally going to focus on this person. It also brings up one other interesting detail that didn't really come up in the conversation with Kaiser, but apparently he gave us a frigate of our own to travel between planets for. But given the way this game has gone so far, I don't really think that means that we're going to have the freedom and ability to travel between worlds to do stuff, especially since there's no reason to travel back and forth between planets. So despite how that slide seems to emphasize that that might be the case, I very much doubt it. After the conversation, we get this incredibly vague cutscene of what's to come, including a dragon and a magical sword. But hey, it's almost over, right? We're getting close to the end. We're gonna see who this Mistress Orange person finally is, and we're gonna finally get some vague semblance of closure with this game. Nope, that was the end of the third and final act, and this game was released in 2021. If there was going to be a sequel at some point, or even a DLC, it probably would have happened by now. But that's it. That is the game Orangecast. It was something. The biggest problem for me personally is the story. Game stories in general don't have to be long or complex. They can be nonsensical as long as they're still understandable. They can be simple as long as they're still fun. Orangecast, unfortunately, was none of these things. I could see the general idea that they were going for in the story, but when it came down to the actual details within the acts, the missions, and the dialogues, it felt pretty disconnected and just didn't make a lot of sense. And it probably didn't help that the game had to be translated from Russian to English. It can cost a bit of money to get professional translations done, and if the developers were not proficient themselves, they likely wouldn't have been able to proofread results from free translators. However, I'm not really an expert of foreign translations myself, so I don't really know how much of the writing was the result of bad translations versus just being bad writing. But regardless of the quality of the translations and the writing, the worst part about the story is the fact that it was incomplete, which didn't make a lot of sense given the pacing of the story. The ending made it sound like there was just so much more to tell for this story, but when you look at the pacing of all the other acts and everything, the fact of the matter is, there was not much else to tell. Act 3 could have ended with us getting to the archive, and then Act 4 could have been all about confronting the Orange Mistress, this supposed dragon, getting that sword, and it could have all been wrapped up within that act. And the dialogue was also problematic, not just because of the writing, but because they were trying to pass it off as a choice matters type of dialogue. The problem is that none of the choices actually matter. The choices we make in conversations have no long-lasting or short-term consequences. People will not suddenly have a different opinion of you just because you chose to say something. And despite how some conversations might indicate that there are multiple paths for you to take to proceed with the story, there's actually no such thing. There's only one path you can take throughout the entire game. There are no dialogue choices that might influence whether or not someone lives or dies. The story does not change at all, regardless of what we say. Honestly, the only thing that changes with your dialogue choice is just how they respond to your choice, but beyond that, it really has no consequences for the entire game. The combat was okay. It wasn't insanely difficult, and save for the spiders, I was never overwhelmed by enemy numbers. The one thing I really hated with the game's combat though, was the ammo system. I never understood the point of shared ammo in any game, especially when you can have multiple different guns equipped at a time. Primary weapons versus handguns, ballistic versus energy, it didn't really matter, they all used the same pool of ammo. But I guess it was pretty fitting because all the weapons pretty much felt the same anyways, especially with damage output. And on top of that, there never seemed to be any advantages between the weapons against enemies. So you basically never had a reason to switch to any other weapon except maybe the scythe because it didn't use ammo at all. Those were really the only major issues I had with the gameplay though. There were of course other smaller issues, but they were easier to deal with because you could just flat out ignore them. Like the barely functional vehicles, the side missions with no tracking or reward system, the maze. They were actually pretty insignificant and easy to forget that they were even there, which I guess is also not a very good thing. You would want memorable stuff in your game, not forgettable stuff in your game. But despite all these issues, I do have positives to say. There was clearly some real effort put into this game. Even if it was hard to understand and was incomplete, they did try to write an actual story. The levels they made looked really cool and had a lot of detail to them. Even though that level of detail did cause my OBS to crash, they still looked really nice. They even went through the effort of having animated cutscenes. There may have been some goofy moments in these cutscenes, but they weren't too bad. And even though it was only for about 6 months, they did stick around long enough to release some patches. And even though none of them completed the story, they did still fix some things. Compared to other developers who release games and then immediately disappear into the ether, that's actually pretty noteworthy. So with all that said, despite its frustrating moments, I did still enjoy playing this game. That being said, I wouldn't say it's worth the asking price of $5.99. So if for whatever reason you're interested in buying this game yourself, it's definitely something to wait to go on sale for. But that's all I have to say for this game. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I thank you all for being patient as I worked on it. This was my first big video for this kind of content, and I was really nervous about it the whole time I was working on it. There was so much to look at and cover in this game, and I was constantly stressing over accidentally leaving something out or getting something wrong, especially with the story because it was pretty hard to understand, but it was still a pretty good learning experience. I know I made a number of mistakes, some that could be fixed right away, and others that I just had to accept and learn from, so I'll definitely be more prepared for the next video. In the meantime, I'll be trying to release other types of gaming content in between so that you're not left waiting for too long until the next video comes out. But if waiting for new videos to release with no real schedule is not your jam, I do stream regularly on Twitch. And I play more than just sci-fi stuff there too, so if you're interested, you can check out my channel at twitch.tv/Crozo. And if you stuck around up till now, thank you so much, I really do appreciate it. If you'd like, please consider leaving a comment below to let me know what you thought about the video, and if you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit the like button. And if you want to stay up to date on new videos as they come out, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Until then, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.